years since riots broke out in Ferguson, Missouri. In the weeks that followed, the country split as people searched for answers. The Guardian of August 19th, 2014 confirms police brutality is a result of centuries of slavery and a history of violence. But there's another indicator that plays a major role. Economics. The Guardian continues, economics can't explain why a white cop might view a black man in a hoodie with such suspicion, or why he lets a white man in the same hoodie go about his business. But economic inequality institutionalizes bias attitudes, allowing racism to thrive. A new study published in the journal Nature reveals a shocking piece to this puzzle. When it comes to economics, the less we see, the better. Nicholas A. Christakis, co-director of the Yale Institute for Network Science and senior author of the study, found that when wealth was made visible, it actually resulted in the rich exploiting the poor. According to Christakis, it's not the presence of inequality that causes problems, but rather how visible that inequality is. This research could be valuable in helping us understand the link from visibility to some of our most horrifying acts of injustice, and why human behavior changes in situations of power. Today, we will discover economic visibility by first uncovering the study's methodology, second, the results, and finally, implications. USA Today reported on November 7th, 2015, that the richest 85 people in the world have as much money as the poorest 3.5 billion. And if Christakis is right, that's only going to get worse. Apparently, we aren't as far off from real life becoming a giant game of Monopoly as we thought. Wealthy people are more likely to cheat while playing games, take candy that's been set aside for children, and less likely to stop at crosswalks, reported New York Magazine on September 11th, 2015. Similarly, the series of experiments done by Christakis and his team of researchers found that bad behavior actually increased when the rich were asked to identify the vulnerable poor. Let's first examine how the study was set up, and second, the process. Initially, the whole thing kind of started out like a high-stakes version of the video game Sims. The experiment began with 1,462 test subjects that were placed into 80 small-scale societies. The software that they used, called Breadboard, allowed researchers to create temporary virtual societies in which they had complete control over the participants, a feature that Christakis somewhat frighteningly referred to as godlike. The participants were given an initial endowment, money, and some were given more than others. With virtual money in their virtual bags, the game began. The goal was to see how willing they were to give other money to the participants. Second, the game was a cooperation exercise that either increased or reduced wealth. The Atlantic of September 9th, 2015 explains, virtual neighbors were asked to give up 50 units of their own wealth to benefit everyone by 100 units, or they could just keep all the money to themselves, meaning they wouldn't lose anything personally, but their neighbors wouldn't receive any benefits. The researchers then manipulated the variables, comparing how participants reacted when they became aware of each other's wealth. In one scenario, the participants were told their own wealth and whether or not their neighbors chose to give up the money. In another scenario, they were told how wealthy or how poor their neighbors were. David Rand, co-author of the study, revealed, major gaps in social inequality changed cooperation. Unless the rich knew how poor their neighbors were. And well, then they stole the candy. Christakis told the aforementioned Atlantic that during the Gilded Age, inequality was just as pervasive as it is today, but major gaps weren't as visible. The rich lived in gated mansions while the poor were forced to scavenge elsewhere. Today, disparities in wealth are much more obvious. The study yielded two results. First, the fairness scenario, and second, the exploitation scenario. Initially, in the fairness scenario, the virtual societies remained unequal, and the rich had no idea the wealth of their neighbors. Overwhelmingly, the rich chose to give up 50 units to benefit everyone by 100 units. As the aforementioned Atlantic explains, it's kind of like in real life when rich people invest their wealth into local networks and the whole network gets richer. Everybody wins because cooperation is neat. Of course, this leads us to our second result, the exploitation scenario. When people became aware that their neighbors were less wealthy than them, they were less likely to give up the 50 units, even though they too could have benefited from cooperating. As the study explains, the rich behaved in a way that was so unaltruistic that it harmed the entire society. As the study noted, visibility may have caused participants to perceive their situations as competitions, to think that wealth influenced social status, or to fear being near last place, all of which could have reduced cooperation. But that's not even the worst part. When the poor found out about the inequality, they chose to keep contributing to the communities. As the aforementioned New York Magazine explains, poorer people kept losing money by contributing to the societies, even though they could see that the rich weren't reciprocating. And that's how the poor got poorer. The study's final conclusion was that visible poverty reduces cooperation, interconnectedness, and overall societal wealth. A Russian mining tycoon named Vladimir Potanin once spent $95,000 on a 4-pound white truffle. Why? Because he can. There are two implications, economic and psychological. Initially, if knowing about this inequality reduces overall societal wealth, then our national economy is at risk. A 2014 Pew Research poll found that the majority of people are becoming aware of this inequality than ever before. As 46% of people agreed, the gap between the rich and the poor is a big problem. The Yale study promotes 2 ways to control income visibility. First, don't publicize personal wealth. And second, don't make wealth visible unless the gaps are low in specific neighborhoods or communities. There's no way of knowing if we can put the genie back in the bottle. But until then, we should just assume that everyone has 20 bucks in their pocket. In truth, the results of the study are alarming. The rich didn't want to help the poor, even if it helped them get richer. What does this say about our desire to not get ahead ourselves, but to bring others back? Further research should consider the implications of economic cooperation and altruism, and how human behavior changes when deciding whether or not to help others, or to help ourselves. Second, the results shed light onto human behavior and power. Christakis' team of researchers found that bad behavior promotes neurological and psychological processes that undercut cooperation. Or as researcher Biggie Smalls explains, mo money, mo problems. On a psychological level, the results aren't that far off from the Stanford prison experiment. When random people were assigned roles as prisoners or guards, the majority of people behaved accordingly. Guards even began to act with violence towards prisoners, and prisoners retaliated. In his 2007 book, The Lucifer Effect, Philip Zimbardo wrote that very few people were able to resist the temptations to yield power and dominance. To end this oppression caused by wealth visibility, we need more research in order to learn how to change the psychology of people in these positions of power. Income inequality still prevails in our society today, and this study showed how easy it is to fall back into its cycle. Today, we discovered the study that explored economic visibility, the results, and the implications. We have long believed that information was power, but maybe when it comes to income inequality, perhaps the less we see, the better.